Добрый день, дорогие друзья.
Good afternoon, dear friends. Good afternoon, dear friends. I think that we have to start our session. My name is Natalia Fishman. I'm assistant to the President of the Republic of Tatarstan. Over the last 2 years, 189 parks were built and 72 parks are under construction there. That is why we are going to speak about parks today. The session is called Out of Thin Air, How Landscape Design Projects Fill Cities Up. We are going to speak about how to create attraction points for the city dwellers in unexpected places. We invited here urbanists as well as urban planners and members of the city administration. Usually there are a lot of stakeholders involved in such processes and projects. We are going to speak about the Zaryadye Park. Sergei Kuznetsov will speak about it. We are going to speak about 2 parks that appeared at the place of urban landfills in New York and Tel Aviv. We are going to speak about a park on the place of a gas factory in Amsterdam and about the future park in Skolkovo. So we have a wide agenda, and we're going to speak not only about the history of the projects but also about some technical solutions, and I believe that it will be useful for everyone to hear about that. First, I'd like to introduce the speakers. Sergei Kuznetsov, Chief Architect of Moscow. Kate Field, Manager of the Department of Science and Research, NYC Parks, Freshkills Park. Tillman Lutz, Partner of Lutz and Partner. Everett Verhagen, Founder of Creative Cities Agency. And Yevgeny Peneva, Project Manager of the landscape company Arteza. I thank you for joining our session, and I would like to remind the speakers that we have a strict timeline. 12 minutes will be the time of speech of Sergei as a keynote speaker. Others have 8 minutes. Please do respect the time limits. And I'm now happy to give the floor to Sergei Kuznetsov so that he could speak about the magnificent Zaryadye project. Thank you. I have more time than others, and I believe that I will cause mistrust on behalf of the other speakers due to that. Well, actually, I have already presented Zaryadye a myriad of times, and I believe that those who are following what is happening in Moscow know about this project. Actually, the park looks almost like that already. It is close to Kremlin, and everyone knows it. I could speak about different things now. I am not going to speak about the parameters and specifications of the park, but I would rather focus on the history perhaps and on some subjects relevant to our current session. Actually, urban wastelands turn into landfills very often because the city cannot tolerate a vacuum, and if there is an empty place, it often turns quickly into a landfill. So the Rossiya hotel was dismantled, and then there were several years of debates regarding what has to be constructed on its place. Norman Foster actually was among those who had some projects for the former Rossiya hotel site, but it did not lead to anything back then, and the site turned into a wasteland. Then we organized a competition, and we have Mr. Kudryavtsev today, who is member of the Friends of Zaryadye project. He's member of the team who won the competition. Here you can see the history of Zaryadye, and in the lower right corner you see a photo regarding our competition. It was in 2013. The reaction of the society was quite controversial, and it reminded me of a book by Ilf and Petrov, when a foreigner from Buenos Aires tried to build a skyscraper, and the city dwellers did not believe that he would be able to build a skyscraper. And we had the same situation. People were saying that what we want to do is absolutely unrealistic. And then they told that everything is too lengthy, everything is too complicated, and now they are telling that we should have already finished the project. So their attitude from the very beginning was quite critical. Well, actually, indeed, the project is quite complex, and we do have a lot of things that we integrated there. I'm sorry for the quality of my slides. I see that basically you cannot read anything. Here you can see the picture. I don't remember the date on which we produced it. If you look at the competition photos, you will see that this picture is quite similar to the photos that were shown during the competition. From the very beginning, we knew that there will be a philharmonic hall in the park, and colleagues from Dillers, Cafidio, and Renfro proposed to integrate the Philharmonic Society into the park, and we designed the climatic zones, the landscape zones that would integrate into the existing urban environment, and we do have different climatic zones such as wetlands and grasslands. There is also a section dedicated to history, and we also have an ice cave that is quite a crazy project there. We are now implementing all that, but when we started to speak about that, there was a lot of criticism when we explained our idea about the climatic zones, about the tundra and wetlands and grasslands. People basically laughed at us, although actually all these climatic zones are part of our environment. But we have managed to implement everything according to the concept, and yesterday I made a tour for Roman Abramovich around the exhibition, and when we approached the Zaryadye makeup, Roman asked me whether Dillers, Cafidio plus Renfro are still in the project, because he thought that perhaps it would not be the case, as happens quite often. We have to know, and we have to remember that people do pay attention to that, indeed. And actually we have worked quite a lot within the consortium and with the government of Moscow, and we managed to keep our consortium, although our path was quite tough. These pictures are quite realistic. They are very close to what is actually being built in the park. These are the views of the glass park. The views from there will be very interesting. This is an engineering and climatic attraction, because it will accumulate solar energy, generate electricity, and create a more comfortable environment in case of heat and frost. And we also have this floating bridge that can already be seen. We have already almost finished it. We are just finalizing its construction now. And you can see the console of this bridge, as well as the Moscow River embankment. And we have heard a lot of criticism once again that we had to disassemble the historic embankment in the city center and assemble something new in its place, but it will be like that. There will be street retail there, and we made the Moscow River visible from the park. We had to expand it a little bit so that the views are better. There are a lot of other things in our park, and I just don't want to dwell on that right now and speak about it in detail. I will just say in a couple of words that we had some ambitious plans that seemed unimplementable for Russia and Moscow next to Kremlin, a historical site within an international competition and serious architects. So we heard a lot of people saying that it was impossible to do that, but we see already that it is actually possible. Here you can see the Philharmonic Hall, and we are proud that we will have one of the best Philharmonic halls in the world in our park. So experience has shown that we can do basically everything using in particular Russian technologies and Russian construction materials. We just need to ensure the good project management, because in that case we will achieve everything that we want. I probably have not respected the time limit. No, we even have time for a question. Okay, thank you. That's it for my presentation. Okay, actually we have still 3 minutes 40 seconds left. Please tell me, what was the hardest thing in this project? There are several things. It's difficult to speak about only one. We installed the information pavilion in the form of a dome, and this dome was at Venetia Biennale in 2012 that was dedicated to Skolkovo, and the dome was recreated. Basically, the same dome was reassembled and reoriented to Zaryadye. And when we installed the dome, we had to replace the fence that had been there for a long time, and different engineering networks were linked to it. And it took us to build the dome. It took us 1.5 months to build the dome, and it took us 6 months to agree upon everything related to the transfer of this fence, to just moving the fence a little bit. We had to receive a lot of permits and agreements on behalf of the authorities, including at the level of the president, and that was the most challenging part. And actually, the proximity to Kremlin is also making things more complicated. And another hard point for us was to deal with the bureaucracy and red tape. It's an issue that is a general issue of for all the projects, and when we are working with the foreign experts, it is even more difficult to bring together these two worlds, the world of the foreign experts and their state-of-the-art ideas, together with the Russian red tape. These are two different galaxies. These are basically opposite things. I hope that we will be able to overcome that, and the situation will be better. There are some other factors as well. There are some issues related to our industry, for example, but we managed to overcome a lot thanks to our work, and actually these things were already easier to manage. We are very grateful to Sergey for this work, and let us thank Sergey for introducing modern architectural and landscape solutions in Moscow. And in the regions, we can also look at the example of Moscow and follow suit. I'd like now to give the floor to Kate Field. I'll ask her to speak about your unique Freshkills Park. It is in the western part of the state and island, and it used to be the biggest landfill on Earth, and now it is being restored. So, Kate, you have the floor.
All right, I just want to start by thanking you for having me here, and I'm very happy to be part of this discussion. So I work for New York City Parks for the Freshkills Park project. And for anyone who is not familiar with the Freshkills Park project, this is what Freshkills used to look like. So Freshkills Park is on the site of the former Freshkills landfill, again on the western shore of Staten Island. And it was, in its time, the world's largest landfill in operations from 1948 until 2001. But this is not what it looks like anymore. Today, it looks a little bit more like this. We have some grassland environments, some tidal creeks and wetlands, a nice snowscape. Maybe you can imagine yourself doing some cross-country skiing or sledding. But I want to put this into the regional context because its location within New York City is very important to the project. As was said, Freshkills is on the western shore of Staten Island. Staten Island is one of the 5 boroughs of New York City, along with Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and of course Manhattan. And the Freshkills project is quite large in relation to example to Central Park, probably New York City's most well-known park certainly. It's 2.7 times the size, coming in at just under 900 hectares. So large that if you put it on the bottom of Manhattan, it would stretch all the way from the Battery up to 26th Street. Or for those of you less familiar with Manhattan geography, if you put it into Moscow, it kind of fits nicely within this second ring road that you have around your city. So this is a huge space now that's plopped down in the middle of an urban region. So the landfill actually started as a project just to fill in tidal creeks and wetlands, which at the time were thought of as not providing much value to the city. And the idea was to fill it in for only 3 years to make way for industrial and residential development. Of course, when you start putting all of New York City's trash somewhere, it's a little hard to stop. And at its peak, it was accepting 29,000 tons of trash per day. So the Freshkills tidal creeks and wetlands went from this image you see on the left to this image you see on the right of basically very filled in large landfill mounds all over. So there was a lot of public pressure, of course, to close the landfill, particularly if you lived in Staten Island, which has a sort of unfortunate nickname of the Forgotten Borough. The Forgotten Borough partially because of this landfill. So residents of Staten Island, of course, wanted it closed, and finally in the 1990s there was political alignment between the Staten Island Borough President, the New York City Mayor, as well as the Governor of New York State, and the decision was made to shut the landfill down. And so in 2001, the last barge of garbage went to the Freshkills landfill. The western portion of the landfill did reopen in 2001 for the sorting of debris from the World Trade Centers. But today, this is what it looks like. So you can see you have these large sections of landfill that's now covered. 2 sections were actually closed in 1996 and 1997 because those had reached capacity, not because it was part of the shutting Freshkills down. The section on the right there, the eastern section, was just capped in 2011, and the section on the west there is still being capped and will be finished in approximately 2019. This is a large, long-term project. And the city of New York, basically, during this closure, had the opportunity to say, what are we going to do with now this giant space that we have? This is not a normal thing for an urban region like New York City to suddenly have, just under 900 hectares of space to do something with. And the decision was made to turn Freshkills landfill into Freshkills Park. So the city launched an international design competition in 2001, and field operations headed by James Corner was chosen to produce the draft master plan. So you can see their plan there on the right for the competition entry. And this is a scene from their draft master plan. So the draft master plan involves about 5 parks in one. Basically, each of those large sections of former landfill will be its own separate park, all making up the Freshkills Park complex. You have this location in the center, which is a location that's currently home to infrastructure from sanitation operations that will house the sort of built development, because you can't do a lot of building on top of a landfill this size simply for the reason that the ground is not completely stable. So this entire process with James Corner field operations and then continuing today takes a lot of community input for its development. The Parks Department, which I work for, is tasked with implementing the designs from the draft master plan. And along the way, we have to sort of use that sometimes as an inspiration because there's so much infrastructure involved in the development that sometimes something that you think you could do ends up being a little bit more complicated given all the landfill closure infrastructure. So in these processes, as we sort of figure out how to best implement those James Corner plans, we work with the community to get their input on what it is that they want in these park projects. And this also happened just even in the forming of the draft master plan. We're doing this right now for a project happening in the southern section of the park, which will include ball fields, recreational trails, some adult fitness equipment, etc. And this is the projection, this is the sort of rendering of what Freshkills will look like. This is a long project. The current slated completion is 2036. So this is a long way away, and that's of course because it takes a long time to develop a park on top of a former landfill that is just under 900 hectares. And the James Corner plan, and as well as how it's being implemented, is designed to actually change with the site as the site changes, because this is a constantly changing ecology. So some of the things that will be implemented, you can see on the top left there, kayaking. We actually already do a very popular kayak program, and this is a project that we're working on for the eastern section of the park, and that's hopefully going into construction within the next couple years. On the bottom right there is a rendering from the North Park project. This project actually just broke ground, so we're very excited, and this is the first interior park project. So I will echo the statement that the impossible can be possible. We are building this park within the former landfill boundaries now. We also use these other two images for some inspiration of how we may start to reuse some of the infrastructure that's already there. So that on the top right there is an image from Toronto, and on the bottom left is an image of our landfill gas flare stations that we have on site and how those might turn into something more like you see there in that example in Toronto. So Freshkills Park today is very different from its landfill history, although it is not yet a fully open park. The majority of the tidal wetlands have been filled in, so we no longer have the historic ecosystem that was there before. And that's important because this is not a restoration project. We're not going to restore this to its previous state. It's impossible. None of that trash is going anywhere. So now instead we're end up with this primary habitat of now grasslands. Of course, these grasslands still perform ecological functions, and we actually see that there's a lot of ecological use that's now coming out of a site that used to be an ecological burden. So what happens when you turn the world's former largest landfill into a 21st century park? It turns out a lot of things change, not just in the park itself, but within the community. So public perceptions change, for example. It used to be a major hurdle for us to convince people that this would be a park, that it would be somewhere that they would want to go. We don't see that as much anymore. We have open events each year where we have people come in and actually start to enjoy the space. Real estate changes. There used to be a very large, basically, increase in real estate prices the further away you got from the Freshkills.
We need to keep to 1 more minute, not longer, okay?
Yeah, that's fine. As long as you got to, the further you got away, the more expensive things got. And that's something that we're seeing that's now decreased. And of course, the environment and biodiversity change. So we ran a biological surveying event, and just in one day, we were able to document 486 different species of plants and animals. So again, this is just a big example of what can happen in these former industrial spaces and how they can be redeveloped. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Kate, и один короткий вопрос, который...
One short question, Kate, from a colleague of mine. The English channel, do you have the translation kit? So can you hear the translation? So right now you are working on a very large-scale project, and you are doing it for 20 years. You have 20 years to implement it. Usually in Russia, even bigger projects are very brief, they are shorter, but your colleagues often say that they would like to work faster, but they don't have the administrative resource to work faster. And we complain of having a lack of time. We have the administrative resources, but we don't have enough time. So what do you think? The project you are working on, should it be completed faster if you had this possibility? If you had the possibility, if you had more administrative resources, would you finalize this project faster?
So if we had more resources, we could get more done. You know, there's a lot of layers involved in a project like this for us, because you basically have the Department of Sanitation currently on the site that holds the jurisdiction over that site. And then you have, for us, the Department of Environmental Conservation, who are the regulators of how this project should happen, as well as then the Parks Department, who's tasked with implementing those James Corner plans in a way that satisfies both the Department of Sanitation and the Department of Environmental Conservation. So yes, more resources would make it happen faster, but there's a certain level of bureaucracy that is unavoidable in a situation like this.
Ну, то есть, на самом деле, баланс, он где-то должен быть посередине, не то, чтобы у нас все так трагически.
So the balance should be somewhere in the middle, so that we can find the optimal balance. Thank you very much. It's very interesting. And now I would like to give the floor to Tilman Lutz, who has been working on innovation of industrial zones, and he has done parks in Turin, in Lyon, in Berlin, and so on. And the most well-known park is a park. That's another park he has done. And right now he's working on the park of Ariel Sharon that is being implemented in Tel Aviv at the moment. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Yeah, maybe the park you wanted to talk about is our smallest project. It's a landscape park in Duisburg North. It's 230 hectares and was telling us a lot about understanding how to deal with such places when you intend to talk about history. And for us, this is a very important basis that there are as many places where history can play a vital part in the role of making of parks and creating identity. However, the project in Tel Aviv is south of Tel Aviv, surrounded by different communities. So one of the first steps they did, which was very important, to create the Dan region, I don't know if the translation is right, corporation, basically, which mitigates in between the different interests of the very diverse Israeli society, diverse in all terms, everything here in the press is true, and managed to solve a problem which you might not think about. I mean, the reason for closing down a landfill, which is part of that, was the nearby airport, the airport Ben Gurion, but also the fact that, oops, this one doesn't want to work, the fact that there is serious flooding in Tel Aviv. Every time at the beginning of the year especially, they have big problems, and that happens almost every year. And the landfill, this is an older picture over here, is surrounded by the rivers which basically transport that water, and you can imagine how this landscape looks like when it's flooded. The risk was that this huge landfill just bombs down. It functions like a big pudding. It's a bit different to Freshkills. There is a big danger, so the closing was inevitable, and the Dan region developed a competition where our proposal, oh, bad picture, won in saying we keep the mountain as it is, and try to, well, basically the form of the mountain, and try to keep that as a historic monument. Also the landscape around, and I want to start with this, shouldn't be just dug out and the material put at the corners to keep the flooding off, but rather go the other way in order to create an interesting landscape. In order to keep from the edges of the park, from where a park begins, the views open to the central monument, which is a landfill, but becomes a park. In order also to concentrate the flooding, which is basically kept in a 7 million cubic meters wide basin. The earth had to be put somewhere. And we basically created a landscape which should also evolve on its own. I'm showing you the concept pictures because I think this is more important. The park is under construction now, but it will take certainly another decade to realize it. We created several elements within that landscape. Some steep slopes become the human corridor, but the flooding area is concentrated in the center. Needs specific attention to the technical functioning of such a flooding zone in a corridor which transports the first 500,000 cubic meters of water, which is usually very dirty, directly off the site, but saves the other within a compound which can be used during most of the time for many years as an intensive park, which is covered with trees and only flooded every 2 to 3 years, possibly. The interesting thing is that this huge ditch is able also to have more water then, and we have to work with the climatic system of Israel, the climatic system of such a built area, but especially with the technical systems which make it possible to keep the water over there. And this is engineering. Our firm basically is highly interested in engineering, not only since we did Duisburg North, which was a blast furnace, but also in transforming technical elements which are usually completely isolated, not accessible, into usable public space. And this for us is, I would say, one of the big potentials in the building of future cities, big cities, as well as others. In fact, like over here, this would be the engineering solution, not accessible, a simply technological element, keeping off water one time every 3 years. What is that for? Let's do something different. Unfortunately, the picture is very bad. This is not yet, it will never look exactly like this, but this is the inspiration which we developed in a master plan. Master plan is a master plan, it's not a project. And we basically want to make it a climbing center, a meeting point, skating area, so where people meet like in a public space in the center of the city. The mountain itself had that specific attention at the beginning. It was the first competition we won. Aria Shawn came later, and we wanted to keep this. It is important to know that the Israeli society is the most developed, I would say, in the world concerning recycling of waste, simply because they don't have resources, small country, and they are not very, familiar with their neighbors. They built up a visitor center where corporations, companies, school kids, people from all around the world come to learn about recycling, and everything is made with recycled material. This is good. This is following cradle-to-cradle principles, etc., something which we really need to establish within our cities. The second thing was to develop around the mountain a kind of berm which holds the form, that it doesn't collapse down like a pudding, but stays like it is, and pushing the rivers slightly off, which results in a fantastic landscape. There was a ditch on top, also not changing everything due to design principles, but developing principles which adapt to the existing landscape in order not to invest again millions, but take history as it is. And this became an oasis. We were working in collecting water and just using that as the least possible amount of water, extra water, and developed a landscape within which is able to transform with a landfill, because a landfill is not solid. A landfill is still moving. It's sinking and unpredictable way. So we developed this kind of rather Mediterranean system of dry walls and did it with recycled materials from big deconstruction sites in Tel Aviv.
1 more minute to go already.
That should be enough. So it results in a little valley on top of the landfill, which was there before, only stable point, a crushing machine in the center where we've put a pavilion, and has become an oasis which makes money today. And that is also interesting for cities. It's not my primary interest, but basically besides bringing people to that hill, which has become the it place in Tel Aviv, which we are very proud of, and with us the Dan region and all the responsible people, they're all coming here, they are celebrating here, and they rent these spaces out for large concerts, like this is happening almost all year round. And you have that wonderful view over Tel Aviv. It's the highest peak in Tel Aviv. So the idea to use landfills, but also flooding areas, etc., as usable features within a city play a vital role in making cities attractive and are the only places today also within city centers which can help a city to transform. Thank you very much.
Спасибо огромное. Мы сегодня договорились.
Thank you very much. We decided to ask everyone questions about management today because we are talking about managing agglomerations. And my question is as follows. You've worked in Europe a lot. Right now you are technically working in Africa, even though it's the most European part of Africa. But you are working in a completely different climate.
The way you put it is очень специально.
But this is a very specific climate and a very specific society. So can you tell us how different is it working with Europeans and working with the Israelis?
I mean, for us, it is an interesting experience to work in different countries, and we're working today in China also. We've been working in Marrakesh, in Morocco.
Could you put the microphone maybe closer? Closer. Yeah.
And Israel. We're working now for almost 20 years on this project. So you can imagine how long the time spans are for landscape architects. And if you are not able to adapt or to work within a given cultural context, within a given way to see things and to work with things, you won't get anywhere with your crazy good ideas. And this concerns everything from the start of the project and a competition, which is always great and nice, up to the final management. We've done great parks in Italy, but it's a pain to see how these projects decay simply because they don't maintain. And in other areas where you don't expect it, you have a lot of maintenance, which is really good, and people who care because they are thinking in the same way. And that is interesting about Israel. It takes a long time to establish things, but in the end, if you accept their climate and their situation, the whole thing develops quite nicely in the end. But you need to have a long, breathe.
Thank you very much. Спасибо.
Thank you very much. And our next speaker will tell us about the gas fabric in Amsterdam. And I would like to say that he has unique awards, the Dutch Golden Pyramid for project management. It's a great honor and it's a rare prize. So we would like to ask our guest to tell us about the creation of this concept. Evert, you have the floor.
Okay, it's a very nice opportunity for me to speak to you about the project that I worked on. But you have to realize that I worked on this project a little time ago. This was between 1990 and 2005. And actually, during working on this project, I was involved with the park in Tel Aviv. This was before Tillman, before the competition took place. I was involved in how to talk with the neighborhood in that park, and I also was involved with the Zaryadye Park. Also, before the competition took place, we worked with people here in Moscow to think about the future of that place and how this park could work. And what I would like to say is that what we will find in those projects that we are discussing here today is that most of the time the technical aspects are the same. It's like you always have to work on infrastructure. You always have, when you work on a new park in an existing a city, you will have to work with pollution. You will have to work with the history of the place, and you will have to work with the environment. But the main question we have to ask ourselves is who is going to use that park? Who are we going to make that park for? What is the use of that park? And that is very often a very difficult question because, and in my project, it took a very long time because we were not in the situation like here in Moscow where you can make this decision to build a park and then put a fence around it and just start building and finish it in 2 or 3 years. We were not in the situation like in Israel where there was already the money was there to build a park. No, we were in a situation like here where we have, do you have the clicker?
Oh yeah.
Where we have the we have a set of old buildings, and let me see if I can make this work. And so you have an existing place, a polluted place with beautiful buildings on it, and there is not an idea what to do with it. But the worst thing that I encountered starting in this project was that there was no money. So we had to start from nothing, and already we have been talking about this issue. I don't know if you use this saying here in Russia, time is money. I think we use it everywhere in the world. But my opinion is that it's a wrong saying, because the truth is when you have no time, you almost have a lot of money. And when you have no money, you need a lot of time. So it's the other way around. It's time is not money, and money is not time. So either you have a lot of money and you can make your project very fast, or you don't have the money and you need a lot of time. So we needed a lot of time because there was no one there believing, the skepticism was everywhere, that there would ever going to be a park produced there and that there would be a new use for those buildings. So the main thing I want to communicate about this project in Amsterdam is that what we did is take our time to find out how this place could be optimal use, could get its optimal use. So in a way, the fact that we didn't have the money helped us to find the right program. Because before we could start building the park, before we could start to do anything, we started with temporary use. And temporary use is a very important aspect that I want to talk about here, because the temporary use helped us to make the best decisions on what the future program of the park was going to be. So we used the buildings in a temporary way for several years to see what would their best use. And the reality was that we got an enormous amount of interest from commercial and cultural enterprises. So we had festivals, we had circuses, we had Cirque du Soleil, we had events, and in the beginning, the future use of the park was thought to be like educational or sport, but because of this temporary use, we learned how to really make a good plan. Okay, this is the technical aspect of I told you the place was very polluted, and it took us a lot of time to find a solution for that, but I'm going to skip that here. We made, after 7 years, we have a solution for the remediation, for cleaning up the soil, and we did a competition. And in our case, in Amsterdam, I can tell you that everybody, every inhabitant of the city wants to say something about this project, because, you know, it's never good enough. So my main work was to bring all these people together. This took a lot of time to make everybody happy, to make everybody feel involved in the project. That is an enormous task. But the result is, when you can do that, is that when the project is finished, a lot of people are going to like it and a lot of people are going to use it. So we have to do with the temporary users, but we also have to do with the inhabitants and with the landscape architects, etc. After the competition, we have a winner, Gustafsson Porter. This is Gustafsson Porter is a very well-known landscape architect company today, but I can tell you, when I started with them in the 1990s, I was their only client. So there was a very tricky situation. We had to work very closely together for 2 years. In this picture, you see the first prize-winning plan, and in the other one is the park that we finally built. So we took a lot of time to solve all these problems. Every square meter of land has a problem that has to be solved, and we took an enormous amount of time and energy to solve these projects. But then when we started to build the park, yeah, the problem was that what we expected with the pollution and then what we expected with the buildings, the truth was completely different. And yeah, we didn't have enormous resources, so it meant that we took 3 or 4 years longer to build the park. We had to clean the pollution was really everywhere, asbestos, etc. But the reason we still were capable to produce the final the park as it is today was because of all the energy and the quality that we invested in the project before. So today these pictures are also already a little bit older. I am in the park like once every 3 or 4 months, but I don't make that much pictures anymore. So, but here you can see the park in 2004 when it was finished. Today it's the most used park in Amsterdam. We have 5 million visitors per year in the park, and that is really an enormous number. I think that for Zaryadye Park here in Moscow, the number of users will be the same, but because it's a very central located park, and Moscow has a great lack of usable green space, so a lot of people will go there. But it's very interesting to see how the park here in Moscow, how it's going to be used. And the same thing, I think, in New York and in Israel, because these parks are so big that it's very important for those two projects that those architects and the project managers do not think that the project is finished when it's open. The project only starts when you open the park, because you really have to look very good at how people are using it, which activities take place, and you have to adapt the park to that use and not the other way around. So this is my final slide. So if you like, you can ask your question.
Thank you so much. You're being very kind. Could you please put the... thank you. Это вопрос.
A question to Everett, and that's the question that I will ask to everyone later. So in Russia now we have a period of massive park building. All the regions of the country are creating parks, and that is cool. There is the Federal Ministry of Construction and the political parties who are involved in that process. The goal is to build a comfortable urban environment. And I feel a bit guilty because in Tatarstan we developed the policy of involving the local residents, and we recommended it to the other regions. We have some guidelines about how we should involve the citizens in the design of public spaces. But during the process, many colleagues ask the following question: what's the limit? Until which point should we discuss everything with the people? And when does it start to hinder the process and break the process down? And so what's this point that we should not go beyond? Because at some point that may create problems instead of resolving them. So which things should we discuss with the community, which things should we not discuss with the community, and where should we stop? That's the question to every panelist.
And the question, because that is the reality we have to live with. Let me give you the answer that I gave to the project owner in Tel Aviv.
You all work in Tel Aviv, right?
I worked in Tel Aviv before the competition. He asked me, how do we involve the public? I went there for 2 weeks. I started to talk with the 35 different communities around the park. And I started to understand that involvement meant that in one community you have to talk to the mayor, in the other one to the rabbi, in the other one to 5 people, in the other one to 10 people. So that's not going to work. So my final advice to the owner of the project was the following. I said to him, the first thing you have to do is think for yourself. Because there are things that you know. In Israel, you know, when you have water, keep it. Don't let the water go into the sea, because in the 3 years that it doesn't rain, you need it for the park. So that's you can think yourself. You don't have to go to the public to ask that. When you have a playground for children, and I walked in an existing park there in Israel, and you put it in the sun, it's never going to be used, because when the sun goes down, the children are no longer allowed in the park. So put the playground in the shadow. How complicated can it be? But the playgrounds were in the open sun, and they were complaining that nobody was using it. So use your brains. But my main advice was, talk to people who use parks. Don't talk to the people around the park, because that's useless. Usually they are moving, they are changing, whatever. You cannot do but if you cannot do that, start to talk to the people who already use parks, because those people are your future users. And when you know that they want to bike, or that they want to play, or that they want to have events, then you can find the right program and use them to make your project better. Because very often you do not know the future users, but you can talk to the present users of existing parks.
Thank you very much. Your go.
You and me?
Yeah, yep.
I can just support what you said. This is very important, but we also need to take something into account. I mean, the people do know usually very well what is important for them in terms of functional things and what they like and what they don't like. But one thing needs to be accepted, and I'm usually getting into trouble when I say that, but I think it's very important. The good parks in the world, I would say all the good parks in the world, I exaggerate possibly, have been decided by cultural elites. Let's take it that way. This is a very wide term. It doesn't mean artists, etc. Cultural elites are politicians as well as thinkers, as people who think into the future. We have to take it as a fact today that a public consultation is a must. And it's a good must because it makes parks and ideas better. But what it doesn't do, it doesn't take the principal decisions.
No,
and that is so important that you need to set up a good process. It doesn't need to be always a kind of slow design process, but something which leads to, well, in Zaryadye was a good competition. I really love that. The same was in the Westergas fabric. We had the same in Duisburg, in Tel Aviv, and the same was in Freshkills. This is unavoidable, to have a good competition with very good and well-selected participants and good decision makers who support that decision also in the end.
Yeah.
And then we integrate all the people thinking about where to put toilets, the entrances, to provide shelter, enough shelter, and even adapt the concepts to local needs. That's the process, and then we can do good parks, and then there is no limit.
Thank you. Kate?
I would also echo both of your answers. and stress that the design is critical as a completion of that process as well, not just at the start. One thing I'll share that we've found that works well for us in this process is, even though there are these sort of open community meetings in the beginning that kind of are a selection of anyone who answers the call to come to those meetings, we've also started to form these advisory groups that have basically special interests and that are heavy park users, as has already been said. So coming up with, for instance, for the East Park project within Freshkills, as that starts to be coming to fruition and actually start to be being constructed instead of just the design, is to bring together a group from the community still, but that are the likely users for that park project. So for instance, the heads of running groups, the heads of kayaking groups, the heads of naturalist groups, and people like that, so that you start to get still community input that's definitely still in the frame of the mindset of the community as a whole, because these are community members, but that's a little bit more geared towards specifically what you need to know to implement that project, as opposed to just always having the constant open call.
Thanks a lot. Makes sense. I think the one who's not going to echo on all the previous speakers is Sergey.
Да, смотрите, тут...
Yes, well, actually, this is a very interesting and deep question, the involvement of the people. And we face this issue daily in our work. And I have already a clear but personal idea. Perhaps it will not be shared by everyone. It's a bit controversial. I think it's a controversial issue, actually. Of course, we've had a standard public hearing procedure, but we also organized the so-called improvised discussions with the interested people. We had such improvised discussions on the project of the reconstruction of Triumfalne Square, because that was a very controversial project, and many people were opposed to the initial design proposed by the government, and the government organized and brought together a big group of people, both professionals and non-professionals. We've had a lot of discussions, and regarding Zaryadye, of course, there were a lot of debates as well. This is, of course, very useful communication in terms of identifying the risks, because we need to understand what people want, and equally important it is to understand what people don't want. And it has been mentioned, of course, that the correct design is crucial and the right competition is essential as well. All the original, interesting and things that are in demand are not the product of the demand by the people, but the product of professionals. For example, we are on the territory of the VDNH exhibition space. We know how it looked before, and actually today we witness a lot of positive changes, and that was not the product of people's demand, because there were no demonstrations, there were no requests to convert this space. The same pertains to the Gorky Park, to the Tretyakovskaya gallery, and so on. And no one from the public asked for Zaryadye as well, although that there was this group, Friends of Zaryadye, but that was quite a small group. So I believe in special communities, in advisory communities, because with them you can have a higher quality dialogue. So this is a very deep issue and a bit controversial issue. So I don't think that we should think that the public should dictate what to do, because they are not professionals in that.
So you really need to talk to those people who are really involved, who are ready for constructive dialogue, and who would suggest some really competent professionals to talk to. And also it's very important to gather together a broad range of public and if we talk about the temporary use, it's also about studying the public opinion. I agree that sometimes we have some things which are in temporary use, and of course this is an issue of debates, but in some cases I might be mistaken here, but we might really use it better. And I think that we really need to have a discussion, some interaction. Excellent. I think you will have more interaction and debates after this session. Excellent. I'm ready for discussions. Any comments?
Want to comment here?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something which is also important. I mean, on the one hand, there's very different traditions about decision making and how to involve the public all around the world. But what is important that, especially when we're talking about the projects on former industrial sites here, we're very often talking about an existing fabric which is highly interesting and the basis for something really fantastic. And very often these things are taken down, and they're the public. And I'm not talking about the larger public because they have interest in a park, abstractly spoken. But the local public is the best supporter and has been always the best supporter to deal with the existing, not taking everything down and replace it with the typical cliches of park which are floating around the world. I think it is extremely important to highlight this. Without public awareness and energy, neither Turin nor the Israeli project, to some extent at least, but especially Duisburg Nord, would have ever happened. And there we are very thankful for this and need these people also in the future. This is about, when we talk about change, it's also about what to keep, and there the public is important.
Спасибо. Мы-то вот у себя в Татарстане такие правила себе придумали, что...
Thank you. In Tatarstan we have rules according to which we can start any project before it gets approval from the public. We present every project and only after approval do we start to build it. So there are different approaches. It's important to understand that, well, Zaryadye is not really such a complex and long-term project, but we hope that the projects that are being started in Russia will be of about the same scale, and we are very grateful to the speakers for sharing their experience. I wish good luck everyone, and the organizers are asking us to stay in the Buenos Aires room, because this topic of landscape design in cities will be continued by the presentation of Mr. Bayrisyan on an oxygen mask in cities.